Some of you can tell that the separation of powers is one of the defining features of American government. The division of political powers into the legislative, executive, and judicial branches is a well-known practice in many Western countries. But where did this idea came from? This idea did not actually derive wholly from Enlightenment or modern thinkers. On the contrary, the division of powers was first proposed to us by Polybius, a Greek thinker of the 2nd century BC. Today, I'd like to talk to you about Polybius and the origins of the separation of powers, which includes the origin of the idea that liberty could be preserved through the separation of powers, endures through the different arguments of Polybius. But before that, I'd like first to introduce to you myself. I am Angel Pamposa of 1AB Political Science A from University of Southern Mindanao. And I strongly believe that an orderly set of rules that distribute and limit power is essential for a free republic to endure the test of time. And later on, we will know more about Polybius and how did he become a political philosopher. This discussion will be divided into 6 parts. The first part will be from city to empire, the rapid rise of Rome. The second part will be the human nature, self-interest, and fear. The third part, the anapsychosis, the cycles of government. The fourth part, Greek solution to the cycle. The fifth part, Polybius solution. And the last part will be the innovation in the Roman government. We will know more first about Polybius. Who is Polybius and where did he came from? Polybius was a Greek historian of the Hellenistic period, noted for his work The Histories, if you're familiar with this book, which covered the period of 246 to 164 BC in detail. The work describes the rise of the Roman Republic to the status of the dominance in the ancient Mediterranean world. So, Polybius was also known or important for his analysis of the mixed constitution or the separation of powers in government. And he was born around 208 BC in Arcadia, a region located in Greece, Peloponnese. So, how did Polybius become a political philosopher? His father, like Cortes, was a politician and a loyal ally to the Achaean League. And one of this is a federalist organization among Greek city-states that aimed to preserve a local independence through collective action. So following in his father's footsteps, Polybius became a statesman and a cavalry commander in the Achaean League. And the focus of his political career was the preservation of the League's independence through cooperation with the powerful Roman hegemony. So the Achaean League was initially aligned with Rome in opposition to the Kingdom of Macedonia. So when the League began to contemplate the idea of an alliance with Macedonia, the Romans reacted quickly by seizing a swath of hostage to ensure Greek loyalty. So imagine, they need to hostage a lot of people just to ensure the Greek loyalty. So these hostages were kept in Rome for a trial that never came, and they were eventually permitted to return home, but only after 17 years in captivity. So Polybius was actually among the hostages captured and transported to Rome. However, unlike his fellow Greeks, Polybius was fortunately treated well by his host Aemilius Paulus. So the pair had met while on a campaign and had become a good friends. So thanks to this friendship, because Polybius not only avoided miserable living in conditions, but he also had the access to the elite of Roman society. So from this vintage of point, Polybius was ideally poised to study the unique and unprecedented Roman constitution. So let's move on to the first topic, which from the city to empire, the rapid rise of Rome. By that time that Polybius was actually writing, Rome had expanded from a meager city-state to an ancient superpower. In the beginning, Rome had few, if any, natural advantages. It was inland and therefore cut off from trade, so located on an infertile soil and surrounded by enemies. So 4 years, the early Romans were a hardy agrarian people who had to work extremely and just to sustain themselves. So the traditional wisdom would predict a depressingly short history of liberty for the Roman people, who would eventually be dominated by their enemies due to their lack of resources. So against all odds, traditional wisdom was soundedly trashed as Rome progressed, and from strength to strength, overcoming their Italian enemies and expanding out into a wider Mediterranean. So many stunned spectators questioned how such an austere or agrarian civilization had come to dominate the Mediterranean with such unprecedented success. So Polybius sought to answer this question in his book, The Histories. So personally, I'd love to have this copy of Histories, but unfortunately, I don't know where to get this, but I'll try to find a copy of this one to have a further reading. So, moving on, Polybius believed that Rome's constitution was actually divided or effective for two reasons. Firstly, the constitution adopted to suit human nature, and secondly, it prevented what he referred to as anacyclosis, which refers to a cyclical theory of political evolution and decay. So that leads us to the next topic, which is the human nature or self-interest and fear. At first, Polybius believed that people were united due to their own weakness and fear. So many ancient political theorists believed that political theory was limited by nature and man. So therefore, any theory of politics must start with an examination of man's nature and faculties. So Polybius believed that we are just united due to their own weakness and fear. And the strongest man among them rose to a position of power, which concludes that this order resembled little more than the actions a herd of sheep or a flock of birds. So humans cease to resemble animals when they begin to apply reason. They tried to connect the interaction between human and animals. So according to Polybius, when one human sees another wrong, they will notice that thing, be displeased and what is going on. So looking to the future and reflecting that they may all meet with the same treatment. So they will naturally be displeased and offended by such conduct, sharing the resentment of their injured neighbor and imagining themselves in the same situation. So through moral imagination and sympathy, an idea of justice is formed. So ferocity and force having yielded to reason, the alpha transforms. What was an alpha now becomes a king. There's a lot of them. So Polybius' account of the origins or justice bear a striking resemblance to the moral theories that Adam Smith would later articulate in the theory of moral sentiment. Polybius described human as rational and self-interested creatures. The duality of fear and sympathy rule our lives. So as long as fear exists, people will cooperate and sympathize with one another, producing a stable society. So problems arise when members of a society lack the imaginative capacity to put themselves in the place of others. So this results in the unsympathetic person practicing little, if any, resistance and benefiting themselves in the expense of others. So let's move on to the next part, which is the anacyclosis, the cycles of government. So Polybius stated emphatically that all existing things are subject to decay, and change is a truth that scarcely needs a proof, for the course of nature is sufficient to force this conviction on us. So according to Polybius, this maxim is actually a nature that can also be applied to political orders. So this was not a new idea in Greek political thought. So Aristotle believed in a cyclical theory of government in which each order begins pure but rapidly decays to its corrupted form. But on the other hand, Polybius, like his fellow Greek predecessors, believe in a cycle of government. So for the Greeks, government came in three varieties: monarchy, ruled by one; aristocracy ruled by the few, and the democracy ruled by many. These forms of government were distinguished as far back as Herodotus, writing in 5th century BC. So, Polybius, like other animal, they believe in human nature forming a herd for the purpose of mutual protection. And after that, they presented this three varieties of government. And according to Polybius, monarchy to tyranny is one of them. So as the first monarch would be an honorable man worthy of the right to rule on his own, uphold justice, and as a result, his rule would be respected even when his physical strength waned in later lives. So as the king reaches old ages, it would be necessary that he choose a successor to inherit his position, and the successor to the first king would not prove so virtuous. So growing up in a luxury and privilege, the new king would act as if he were a superior to his subjects. So his taste would become excessive and offensive to the populace or at a large or many people. So as a result of his lack of virtue, he would eventually become a tyrant. And next will be the aristocracy to oligarchy. So, unable to bear the humiliation of injustice, the best of men would rise up against the new tyrant. So, this rebel would not usurp power for selfish gain, since according to Polybius, they were just a noblest or most high-spirited or most courageous people, because such men are least able to brook the insolence of princes. So when they are prevailed, harmony would once again be restored. So these chiefs gladly assumed that this charge and regarded nothing as of greater importance than the common interest they had. So administering the private and public affairs of the people with paternal solicitude. Yet again, the same issue would rear its ugly head, but namely the problem of succession. The sons of these noblemen would not grow up to emulate their courageous father, but instead, having no experience of misfortune and none at all of civil equality and liberty of speech, and been brought up by the cradle or amid the evidences of power, such as high position by their fathers. These petulant aristocrats would indulge in all kinds of greed, lust, and excess. So, consequently, they would meet the same fate as the kings, which is to become a violent overthrow. So, next one or the last one, the democracy to mob rule. So the people of his exhausted society had lost faith both in monarchy and in aristocracy. So since both ruled by one and ruled by few, so they had a similarity, then it had proved to be the unreliable system. So the new political order was to be based upon rule by the many or the democracy. So as with the Polybius political orders, democracy defines as the experience its moment of flourishing glory and freedom. So for a meantime, the founders of this new democracy valued equality and freedom of expression. However, the next generation, as always, proved problematic. So growing up in a society of equality, the new generation, especially the richer members or have that a privilege, no longer valued the virtue of equality. So instead of aiming for preeminence, they are aiming for another possible way to corrupt and, to have their own good qualities by just ruining the estates and attempting to corrupt many people in every possible ways. So this democracy jumps to mob rule. So take note that the central problem in anacyclosis, as Polybius characterizes it is the lack of continuity between successive generations. So the justice of the monarch decays to the pride of tyrant, and the virtue of the aristocrat decays to the indulgence of the oligarchies, and the equality of the democrat decays to the greed of the mob. So unsurprisingly, this decline culminates in anarchy. So reverting once more to step one, the grim sequence began again. So probably the problem in anacyclosis is the lack of continuity between successive generations. Moving on to the next slide is the Greek solution to the cycle. So each system of government has its own virtues or different virtues, but each has an inherent vices. So using an analogy ship borrowed from Plato, Polybius explained that the iron can rust, wood has its own worm, and a timber is a subject to pests. So similarly, each constitution has a vice engendered in it and inseparable from it. So the idea that a mixed constitution would yield a peaceful society was an idea that dominated political thought in an ancient Greek world. So Polybius, however, departed from this consensus drastically. So for the next part of the discussion, which is the Polybius solution, Polybius stated here that the function of politics is not to create unanimity, but rather to preserve liberty through stability. And that this idea is evident in his praise of the Spartan constitution, where Polybius notes that Sparta enjoyed a lasting heritage of freedom, which asserted that anacyclosis, with its constant gravitation towards despotism, it is detrimental to liberty. Thus, this is necessary that the cycle be halted and stability maintained. So, how did the Romans preserve their liberty? One might argue that Romans were made great by their leaders who displayed great personal and civic virtue, but there are many examples throughout Roman history of selflessly dedicated and brave leaders, such as Cincinnatus, who gave up absolute power for a simple agrarian life. Imagine, he gave up his power and treasures just to have a simple agrarian life, and this was actually not the reason why the Rome succeed. However, Polybius did not believe that the virtue alone was enough to or engender a stable and free society. So he disregards Athens, rejecting it as an unhelpful model to follow precisely because its moment of greatness were achieved by great men. So shortly after these great men perished or were ousted, Athens, according to Polybius, collapsed back into mediocrity and confusion and destitution. So another issue for Polybius was actually the human nature is not particularly malleable. So political theory has to adapt to human nature, not vice versa. Rather than hoping blindly for virtuous leadership, which was not guaranteed, Polybius firmly believed in reliance upon good rules and institutions to preserve an orderly liberty. So next will be the innovation in the Roman government. Polybius identifies and discusses three institutions of the Roman government: the consuls, the senate, and the popular assemblies, which each embodied one of the three orders of government. So monarchy was presented by the consuls, this one, because the consuls had the power to command armies and presided over the Senate and the popular assembly. The Senate, which is merely an advisory body, but in practice it is authority extended to a variety of public policy issues. And the last one will be the popular assemblies, which it had the sole power to pass legislation, elect magistrates, and even ratify or reject foreign policies. So take note of this one. According to Polybius' account of human nature, we are fundamentally self-interested beings who aim to increase our powers. However, we are also responsive to fear, right? So each part of the government has a separate and distinct function. So given the separate nature of each facet of the government jurisdiction, each part will naturally fear the encroachment of the others beyond their proper limits. So this fear actually generated a surprisingly beneficial type of conflict. So each of Polybius' institution would compete against the others in order to protect its own realm of authority. So their mutual fear of losing their respective powers would thereby produce the stability Polybius valued. So next one is Polybius' account of the Roman Constitution was actually a wide appreciated work, gaining praise from thinkers including as Machiavelli, James Harrington, Algernon Sidney, Montesquieu, John Adams, and James Madison. So before we finish, I'd like to leave you with one final thought according to Polybius, which is the rise of the Roman Empire. That from this, I conclude that the best education for the situations of actual life consists of the experience we acquire from the study of serious history, for its history alone, which would causing us harm, enables us to judge what is the best course in any situation or circumstances. So Polybius' account of the Roman Republic Constitution was actually, as I said earlier on the first part of our discussion, was an orderly set of rules that distribute and limit the power, as is very essential for a free republic to endure the test of time. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen, was what I wanted to share all of my thoughts with you, and this summarize all the things that we had here on the PowerPoint. So this will be the reference of my reporting. Thanks to these people, because I was able to report properly because of this people here and the references. So if you have any questions, you can freely message me at my Gmail account, jelly@8296 gmail.com, and you can contact me also on my number given on the PowerPoint presentation. So that's it. This is the end of our presentation. Thank you for sparing your time with me, and I hope you'll learn something from me, and we will know further about this topic. We will not stop reading about the different articles related to this kind of topic. So thank you, and God bless you.